Good morning, conference attendees. It gives me a great pleasure and honor to have the opportunity to deliver this lecture on behalf of Ms. Sheam Satkuru, Executive Director of the International Tropical Timber Organization, ITTO. The invitation was extended to her to deliver this lecture at the 10th Regional Wood Anatomy Conference taking place at the Hokkaido University. But due to other important assignments coupled with our own event, that the Global Legal and Sustainable Timber Forum, GLSTF 2024, which is taking place in Macau from September 10th to 13th, 2024, she is unable to appear in person and send her apologies. My name is Nurudeen Iddrisu. I am Director of Division of Trade and Industry at ITTO. I will be doing this presentation on behalf of the Executive Director and ITTO virtually. For this, I say thanks to Dr. Iddrisu, Chairman of the Organizing Committee of the 10th Pacific Regional Wood Anatomy Conference, for the invitation. The title of the presentation is Sustainable Management of Tropical Forests and the Role of Wood Science to Forestry and Timber Trade. We are cognizant that Dr. Yifan Yin will deliver a paper on the contribution of wood anatomy to forestry and wood industry in the last decade. We will give highlight of wood science role in forestry and timber trade as it relates to some of the projects we have financed under wood tracking and traceability system in our member country for purpose of aiding in sustainable management of tropical forests and supply of legal and sustainable timber into the marketplace. Thank you. So, as earlier mentioned in my intro remarks, the title of my presentation is Sustainable Management of Tropical Forests and the Role of Wood Science in Forestry and Timber Trade. My presentation is going to be in three parts. The first part would be to talk about International Tropical Timber Organization, that is ITTO, who we are and what we do. The second part will then cover management of tropical forests. And the third part will then dwell in to talk more about the role of wood science in forestry and timber trade. So I have three areas that I want to cover, and that is what we were requested to do based on the invitation. So ITTO, who are we? International Tropical Timber Organization mission is divided into two parts. The first one is to look more into the promotion of sustainable management and conservation of tropical forests. And the second one is promote the expansion and diversification of trade in tropical wood from sustainable managed and legally harvested forests. It is worth noting that ITTO is the sole international government organization focused entirely on tropical forest resources. That is to say, we are the only entity globally that focuses its attention on the management of tropical forests and also looking into trade of tropical timber. And I can also say that we are also the only international organization based out that is headquartered here in Yokohama, Japan. Let me just give you some little bit of facts and figures about ITTO. ITTO was formed in 1986, that is about 38 years ago, under the auspices of United Nations Trade Organization. We are now operated under the International Tropical Timber Agreement 2006. That is to say, this is the ITTA agreement that has been implemented currently. And under this agreement, 2006, we have 76 members, and our members are divided into two caucuses. That is producing country members, which are 37 in number, and then consumer country members, 39. For example, if you look at the producer members, there are 14 countries from Africa, 10 from Asia and Pacific, and 13 from Latin America. So when we talk about producer member country and consumer countries, the producer member countries, as you can see, are those countries that are producing tropical timber and trade in tropical timber. Consuming member countries are those that actually consume and buy tropical timber from these producing member countries. So members include the entire EU 27. We also have China, United States, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada. These are just few of the countries that I'm mentioning that are members of the consuming caucus. In terms of coverage, members of the ITTO actually cover 80% of global tropical forests and account for 90% in terms of tropical timber trade. So we are actually very extensive in terms of coverage of membership of our ITTO dealing in tropical timber trade. So tropical forests do have a lot of contribution to planetary well-being. Forests cover about 31% of the planet's land surface. And of course, you all know that we derive a lot of benefits, both directly and indirectly, from forests. Of course, climate change is one important thing. Everybody, even in primary school, do understand that forests play a vital role in climate change mitigation, adaptation, and of course, we have erosion control. We also have a lot of items that we derive directly from the tropical forest, and of course, our forest in its entirety. It is worth noting that 1.6 billion people depend on forests for their subsistence. That is more than the population of China. It is also more than the population of India, which is now currently the most populous country in the world. It is also more than the entire population of Africa. Tropical forests alone represent about 45% of all forests in the world. That is to say, there are about 1.84 billion hectares of tropical forests, of which 22% are found in Latin America, 16% in Africa, and 7% in South and Southeast Asia. Even though we have just 7% in South and Southeast Asia, it is worth noting that when it comes to value addition of tropical timber trade, it is mostly coming from South and Southeast Asia. The economy is quite big in South and Southeast Asia when it comes to tropical forest trade. Also, over 70% of global population live in extreme poverty, and these people live in the tropics. So one will ask, why are we then having all of these people dwelling in the tropical countries? Definitely, it is because of this that we have high incidence of illegal logging taking place. Because if you have a lot of people who do not have livelihood and they have forests, the thing that they can do is maybe just go and start trying to get their livelihood by way of going into the forest. This is how, in most places in the tropical countries, deforestation is done, because people there do not have livelihood. Imagine 70% living in extreme poverty, but they do have this access to the forests. But of course, it is not for government to leave this for population to just go and do that. That is why we do have government to intervene into curbing the incidence of illegality. But despite the contribution, that's immense contribution of tropical forests to human well-being, we still have a lot of deforestation taking place. For example, in the year 2015 to 2020, it is estimated that the world used to lose about 10 million hectares of forest per year, which is equivalent to about the size of Korea. This is something that we have to do, and as we sit down in this conference to deliberate, we should be looking at how we can actually bring some of these solutions during our deliberations so that we can help these tropical countries to be able to curb illegal logging. So, ITTO, what do we do? As I mentioned, we have extensive coverage in terms of tropical timber trade, but we here at ITTO, at the Secretariat base in Yokohama, Japan, we dwell more and cover 4 programmatic lines. The number 1 is legal and sustainable supply chains. This is one area we actually dwell on by supporting our member countries, providing support in terms of funding through proposal to be able to embark on projects on legal and sustainable supply chains. We also do offer our members support when it comes to conservation of biodiversity and ecosystem services, another key area of our coverage in terms of services to our member countries. And of course, forest landscape restoration and resilient livelihood is another important area that we do cover in terms of services to our members. And of course, last but not the least is emerging issues and innovation. So having now covered ITTO, what we do and who we are, I'm now moving to how we manage sustainable the tropical forests. Now, I want to ask this question, and I want all of you to join me to answer this question. What is sustainable forest management? According to FAO in the year 2020, sustainable forest management is the stewardship and use of forest and forest land in a way that maintains its biological diversity, productivity, regeneration capacity, vitality, and their potential to fulfill now and the future relevant ecological, economic, and social functions at the local, national, and global levels, and that it does not cause damage to other ecosystems. So if you look at this definition, we align this definition to sustainable development, where we take care of the environment, and when we look at the environment and manage the resources within the environment sustainably, by also guaranteeing that whatever that we take from this environment in terms of resources, we are doing so and we do not impact other ecosystems. We are also doing so taking cognizance of the fact that we are going to leave these resources intact or even make it better for the next generation, as well as trying to also have economic benefit from these resources. We should be doing that, taking cognizance of the social aspects of it. Because there are a lot of people who live along the fringes of the forest, and all what they have is the forest. And that is where they get their energy in terms of wood for cooking. That is where they get their protein in terms of nutritional values from the forest. So sustainable forest management mirrors very well sustainable development, and then it is actually based on these 3 pillars: environmental, economic, and social well-being. Now, how do we manage tropical forests? In most countries, tropical forest management looks at 3 main objectives. They set aside some parts of the forest and call it production forests. So production forests actually is where we get the timber and the non-timber forest products. So we do not just go into a forest and start cutting. Countries have to demarcate which part of the forest is going to be for production. That is where we have production of timber, that is where we have the trees cut, and then also that is where we get a lot of our benefit in terms of directly timber products for trade, timber products for construction, timber products for use in housing, etc., etc. And of course, as I mentioned earlier on, we do have the non-timber forest products, where rural dwellers who live around the fringes of the forest can quickly move into these forests and then get, for example, firewood for energy. They can also get nutrition, that is by way of bush meat, as we call it in Africa, and other indirect benefits that they can actually accrue from this. So the production forests, which we now understand is where we get the timber products from, we need to be able to demarcate what we call annual allowable cut, ASC. So this is done, that is, how much timber am I going to cut from these production forests a year? So if I set up the annual allowable cut, I know that I'm going to get this X amount of volume, that's cubic meters per year. Doing that sustainably, I should be able to manage this forest year in, year out, so that I do not devastate the forest. I leave these production forests to have the productivity going on, to have the possibility to give timber products in its perpetuity. Because if you cut everything, if you come the following year, there will be nothing. But if you set up the annual allowable cut, it guides you that year one, I am going to take out, let's say, 500,000 cubic meters. Year two, 400,000 cubic meters. That way, we do understand, because this is based on science, we are looking at how much we can cut. And the forest can still, or the production forest can still give us these forest products at a sustainable basis. So that is how come we have the annual allowable cut, so that we don't go beyond it. Once you go beyond it, then it means that at a shorter period of time, your products that you get from the forest definitely will continue to diminish. But we do not want to do that. This is a natural renewable resource, so we really want to be able to get products from these production forests in perpetuity. And of course, we have protection forests. So countries do not only look at exploiting forests for timber, but they also have to set aside some forests for protection. Protection of the watershed, protection in terms of erosion control, and of course maintenance of biodiversity. So some countries may call it national parks, where we can actually have ecotourism and all these things, recreation, so that we can enjoy that, and so that these forests continue to give us some direct benefit, but non-timber forest products that we gotta get from these forests. So that is protection forest. Some may call it protection areas. It all depends on the country definition in terms of their objective. And the third one will look mostly managing the forest for the people. For example, in some countries, some of these forests are set aside at the community level, where they allow people from that community to work together with the government services to manage their forests. And that is where they can also get some revenue. And of course, if timber merchants are given concession in such areas, they also take care of social responsibility agreement, so that they can be able to put something back into the society for the people to enjoy, as they also continue to get their revenue through timber exploitation. So basically, these are the three main designations in terms of forest management in the tropics. We have production forest, we have protection forest, and management of the forest for the people. And of course, this can also bring about setting up plantation in such areas, especially when they are devastated. Now, we talked about the production forest. It is worth noting that even in the production forest, we need to set aside timber production zone. Because if you are looking at sustainable production of timber to provide perpetual flow of revenue for the resource owners and to fund forest management activities while maintaining environmental quality and social responsibility, we got to have to set aside these key areas so that all of these things are taken care of. And also in the timber production zone, we do have what we call compartment. The compartment, for example, in the case of Ghana, where I come from, is about 128 hectares. So the compartment within the timber production zone is where we go in to cut trees. That is where we do have timber harvesting and timber exploitation. So we have all these areas demarcated within the timber production zone, within the production forest, so that we'll be able to control harvesting in these areas. For example, in a compartment, that is when a compartment is designated and given out for timber exploitation, we allow 2 to 3 trees to be taken per hectare. So it is important that those who are not familiar in terms of tropical forest management get to understand that even when you are given a place to cut trees, you have been asked to cut not more than 3 trees per hectare. And of course, you can understand the size of an hectare, and you are only taking 2 to 3 trees, maximum of 3 trees in most cases. So we are employing science that dictate to us that this is the way you can actually manage the tropical forest so that it can continue to recover after harvest, so that it can continue to be productive and then give us the timber products in perpetuity. So it's not that people just go in and start harvesting. No, it is based on principles, it is based on science, and only 2 to 3 trees are taken for every hectare so that we can maintain the biological diversity of these forests and other ecosystem services that we get from the production forests. Now, when we also set up these compartment for timber harvesting, we also have what we call felling cycle and also set up the minimum felling diameter. So felling cycle refers to the number of years it takes for a logger to come back to an area previously logged. And in most cases, it is about 40 years felling cycle that is prescribed at the minimum. And for some countries, depending on the species and also depending on the basal area, they set aside about 30 years as the felling cycle. So as I mentioned, it is when you have the opportunity to go into the compartment to take out trees. You cannot go back in there until after 30 years time or 40 years time. All of these depend on the policy of the country where we have that. So get it that felling cycle is actually set up. And it is important to also point out that in some countries, for example, when a logger is given the rights to the trees to go and they take them out, they are given 2 years maximum, in some cases 3 years, within which you can do the harvesting. Because we have to understand that sometimes you may have the harvesting right, but you may not have the market for the tree species. So if we have the allowance, the leeway in giving you this opportunity, maybe year 1, there is no demand for mahogany. By year 2, there is demand and you can go in and take out the trees that you have been prescribed to do. So after the 2 or 3 year, that you have opportunity to go in and take the timber product that is prescribed for you based on the yield regulation. You can no longer go in there until after 30 or 40 years, depending on the felling cycle. There is also what we call felling diameter limits. This one, it talks about how much in terms of diameter. What is it? Do we just go in and take trees out? Any tree? No. There is a minimum felling diameter that is prescribed, depending on the species. But in most cases, for example, in my country, Ghana, that is where I come from, the felling, that is the minimum felling diameter set is 50 centimeters. So you cannot cut tree from the production forest that is below 50 centimeters diameter. But any tree that is above the 50 centimeter diameter, sometimes we have trees that are up to 100 centimeter diameter, 120 centimeter diameter, then that is what you are allowed to take out from the forest. So what it means is that in this case, if you have a diameter class, let's say 45 to 49, it is not actually put into the yield for harvesting. But when you finish your harvesting activity, maybe in the next 40 years, when you come back in there, those that were 45 to 49 would now be in the range of 50 plus and can now come into the felling cycle for the next generation because they are now meeting the minimum felling diameter of 50 plus. So all of these things are prescription that we need to do and then give to concessionaires or loggers to be able to harvest timber from these production forests sustainably. So we do have a procedure in terms of timber harvesting. First and foremost, depending on the country, we have these series of operations, which is a normal standard procedure that you have to adhere to. In terms of tropical forest management, especially when we are looking at sustainable management, there must always be a pre-survey compartment inspection before a logger goes in to do logging or cutting trees. There must be what we call stock survey. You send in team of surveyors to look at the trees in the compartment where you are going to do the harvesting. And of course, all of these things is also based on inventory. Depending on the technology that you have, you can do it from the comfort of your office by looking at the inventory data and then also able to zoom in to select the trees that you want to take out. But in some cases, mostly in African country, they have to do this by going into the forest itself to do the stock survey. Then after the stock survey, you have to sample about 10% of the stock survey to ensure that is another team will go in to ensure that the trees that are being selected for harvesting actually meets all the minimum requirement in terms of diameter, in terms of how many we have per hectare and all these things. And of course, based on these, we are able to estimate the yield and then also draw a yield map. So you have to have the yield map. The yield map tells you you are going to this point to take this 3x and go to that point to take 3y and then take 3z. So that's how we do these things and then given to the timber merchant. And of course, all of these things is done by estimating the volume of the tree that you are going to fell. Standing tree volume is determined, and when the tree is felled, we also have the crosscut volume that we have to estimate. The reason why we have these two components, that is standing tree volume and then the crosscut volume of the log, is that we need to have the basis of doing reconciliation. For example, if a timber or merchant or a logger is given prescription to take out 3 trees, and the standing volume is, let's say, 50 cubic meters. When the tree is felled and crosscut, he only takes out, let's say, 40 cubic meters. When he takes his tree out, let's say, to the yard for mailing, and you go back to look at the volume that he has taken, and then you realize that there is now about 50 cubic meters of volume based on your reconciliation, then it gives you the idea that there is some little bit of maybe stealing, let me just put it bluntly here. There is definitely dishonesty on the part of the logger, because crosscut volume was 40 cubic. How come you have a volume that is equivalent to the standard tree volume? So all of these things are done, we call it check and balance, so that you are able to know that this is what is being given to you in terms of extraction, and this is what we expect to give you when you go to the log yard And of course, when you do further processing, we can always go back to trace and look at the volume right from the standard tree volume all the way to the final product, so that there is always check and balances so that we can have complete reconciliation of the volume. That is the kind of accountability that we have in tropical forest management. So once all of these things is done, you have your tree map, the yield map, you are able to take out the tree, you do the cross-cutting, then you are issued what we call log conveyance certificate. That is the certificate that will give you the permit to be able to cut the logs from the forest to the mill or whatever you are going to process it. And when that is done, we also come back. That is the forestry department would then come back to do inspection of the compartment and issue a closure certificate. And one closure certificate is issued, you cannot come back there until after 40 years. So you realize that all of these things in terms of the procedure gives you assurances that there is some kind of accountability, there is adherence to governance principle in terms of management of the forests in the tropics. And also we do have some environmental conservation measures within production forest. Even though an area is designated timber production zone under the production forest system, we still do have some prescription that we take care of. For example, there must be retention of trees in sensitive areas. Trees on slope more than, let's say, 30%, that is about 15 degrees, should not be taken out, that should not be felled. And then trees in swamps and rocky areas should not be felled. And trees that are within 50 meters of a major watercourse should not also be cut. Even though they may be good looking, they could be part of the tree species that is in high demand. This is environmental consideration to leave these things. And of course, we also look at retention of seed trees, because this is the renewable natural resource. We want to be able to look at seed trees that can provide viable seed, so that there will be natural regeneration for the forest to continue to give and produce the good that it is set up to do, by way of having the next generation of trees in the forest. Logging not allowed along steep slopes, and also logging not allowed in biodiversity sensitive areas. So all of these are environmental considerations that we have to take into consideration even in production forest. So it is not all trees taken out, but all of these things are environmental consideration that we have. And for each country, they all have what we call standards and control. And in ITTO, we call it criteria and indicators. So before a logger goes in to the forest to take out trees, he needs to have what we call yield regulation given to him by the government authority. There must also be some form of wood tracking system, into brackets traceability. When the tree is taken out from the forest, how do we monitor the flow of these trees to the marketplace from, let's say, from the factory or from the sawmill? So there must be some level of traceability where you can trace out the trees from the forest to the mill, from the mill to the marketplace, and from the mill, let's say, to export. So we have what we call traceability. And for every forest reserve which is being managed, there must be some manual of procedure and guideline. All of these to give you prescriptions on what to do in the forest. It also includes the management plans that you need, and there must always be pre and post exploitation audits. And if some trees are actually sites listed, whether Appendix 1 or Appendix 2, there is also prescription on how these trees are taken out, especially for export, adherence to the CITES regulation. And of course, there must always be compartment closure and issuance of certificate. So these are the normal standard controls. Now I go to the third part of my talk, which is to look at the role of wood science into bracket wood ID in sustainable forest management. As I mentioned earlier during my intro, we are going to cover this based on the project that we have supported in the field. As I know, there is also a paper to be delivered during this conference to talk more about it. But of course, what role does wood science play in terms of sustainable management of forest? The major role is to assist in combating illegal timber trade. And most, not most, but some tropical countries who are members of ITTO have signed up to the VPA, that is a voluntary partnership agreement with the European Union. And some of these laws are actually prescribed for countries to be able to do robust monitoring in terms of traceability of the products that is coming from the forest to the marketplace. So wood identification is actually key, especially when it comes to placing products in the marketplace. First and foremost, we should be able to understand what species are we taking out. If the species go to the marketplace, are we able to confirm that it is mahogany, not African cherry? So wood ID actually help us to be able, of course that is true, wood science, to be able to do these things in adherence to the law of the country and also in adherence to forest law enforcement, governance, and trade. And of course, forensics also come into play. And I will talk about this much later on. So wood ID actually would help us to be able to use the forest resources wisely. And I will talk more about that in the subsequent slides. So what is the problem that we are facing currently in tropical forest management? There is unsustainable and illegal logging taking place, and these are major drivers of deforestation in Southeast Asia, in Africa, Central and South America. These are drivers of these are drivers of deforestation that we need to tackle. And it is informative to share that in some countries, deforestation can be up to 90% going on. For example, countries that are in war zone, these forest resources are actually open in conflict areas for people to just go in and then devastate the forests. But of course, these are exceptional cases. What is the other problem that we identify associated with timber, especially how we are looking at wood science to be able to address this? It is estimated from the Global Forest Initiative that illegal logging ranks third, that it ranks third in terms of largest transnational crime. And this actually derives $157 billion through this multinational crime that people are actually perpetrating by use of timber. And this is a data that is actually been given through May and Cloud through their research. That is enormous amount of revenue being generated through organized crime. And of course, you would recall that some countries, as I mentioned earlier on, are in conflict zones, and people take advantage of these organized crimes, take out lumber and export it. All of these things actually brings about, evasion of revenue that would have been accrued to these countries. And the other problem is that illegal logging definitely threatens global biodiversity. It has socio-economic and political implication. And of course, as we have CITES, that is our Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of fauna and flora listed tree species under Appendix 1 and 2, we have to be able to actually ID or identify these wood resources very well, because if we are not able to do that, we can actually confuse endangered tree species that has been listed under CITES and confuse it for other trees that we do have. So all of these things is important, and wood ID, for that matter, wood sign, will be able to help us to curb or stamp some of these problems that we have in terms of timber identification. And currently there are over 800 timber species listed under CITES. And for example, some operators intentionally misidentify some tree species because depending on the value of the tree, you pay, stumpage and all these things, or taxes, so to speak, broadly. So for example, we have mahogany, which is quite precious, and the value of mahogany is much higher. So a logger or someone in the community can intentionally misidentify African cherry for mahogany so as to be able to pay lower taxes. So wood ID play a vital role in ensuring that we are able to bring some of these problems that I have listed here under control. So at the marketplace, we are looking at promoting sustainable supply chain of forest products through law enforcement. And this is actually driving development of science-based wood identification technologies. So you go to the marketplace in terms of trade, you want to ask yourself, the tree that I'm cutting, am I able to trace it to its origin? Where is it coming from? What tree is that? And these trade questions are actually addressed through using novel science, through wood science, to be able to address these things by way of being able to identify the tree, being able to reconcile where the tree is coming in terms of its geolocation. These are some of the questions that wood ID is now able, to bring into play in terms of development of robust sciences to be able to curb some of these illegalities that we have occurring at the marketplace. So we can also mention a little bit about forensics. How do we identify this wood or timber? We do that through genetics, through DNA barcoding. We can do that through DNA profiling, and ITTO has already funded a lot of projects where we do genetic work, genetic study by way of DNA barcoding, profiling, and of course, currently we are funding a proposal, that is a project proposal that we have just funded by way of using stable isotopes in radiocarbon to be able to identify location, that is geolocation or origin of Ipe and Kumaru, which was listed under CITES Appendix 2 years ago during the CITES COP19 in Panama. So these are some of the work that we have been doing, and of course for those who are very good at visual ID, they are able to but of course you've got to have the mastery, otherwise we have to use high tech, that is technology, through genetics and chemical to understand where this tree is coming from, what tree is that by way of ID. That is the kind of science that we are embracing today to be able to use wood science for purposes of tracking the wood to its origin, and also at the marketplace being able to use and identify the right timber resources that we are placing in the marketplace. For example, traceability, some of call it timber tracking. This is just to give you highlight of some of the project that ITTO has funded in the field. We have given funds to provide traceability system, which definitely helps in sustainable forest management and also help control illegalities. It also helps companies to control timber flows and improve efficiency and forest governance, among others. So traceability is very, very important, and ITTO has implemented projects on the ground in Cameroon, Ecuador, Guatemala, Panama, Philippines, etc., using some of these novel technology that I have just mentioned in the previous slide. I've already mentioned about the stable isotope study on Kumaru and IPE, where we have collected samples from Brazil and Peru to undertake the study. And one other novelty is the use of xylotron. And of course, I am speaking to specialists who know very well that xylotron exists today. And of course, wood anatomists, as you are in this conference, do embrace it. For example, Ghana, 2-3 years ago, thereabout, got funding from the U.S. Forest Service, and then they are able to develop this xylotron. That xylotron is just an equipment, laptop, and other handheld devices where you are able to use it to identify a tree. And they were able to use the xylotron, took samples, and they are able to now document identification of over 123 species by just using an mobile app integrated into this. And then you'll be able to just identify it in the lab, forensic lab, or even in the field, as you can see someone with a mobile app. And that is another technology that has been developed from the xylotron. They moved to the Xyloric inspector, which is now fully automated mobile app that you can be able to use to identify some tree species, and also even have recommendation of what species can be used for. Is it a low density, high density, medium density, and it gives you prescription on what you can use it for, alongside telling you specifically what wood it is, and also telling you its geolocation. So all in all, these are some of the projects that ITTO has funded, but of course the last two that I mentioned is actually funded independent from ITTO, from U.S. Forest Service, but of course Ghana is a member of the ITTO, and then this is just to give you an idea of the novel technology that we have, and for which ITTO is actually funded in the field. So in conclusion, SFM of tropical forests, forest-based enterprises, and international tropical timber trade all add value to tropical forests and contribute significantly to inclusiveness and resilience while improving economies and livelihood. It is also critical to dispel the misconception that harvesting a tropical forest leads or contributes to deforestation. Timber, when sourced, processed, and used legally and sustainably, is a renewable, carbon-storing, recyclable material and a cornerstone of sustainability. Last but not the least, wood science and associated technology could aid to combat illegal logging, improve sustainable management of tropical forests, as well as improve forest governance and legal and sustainable timber trade. Thank you very much for this opportunity to address the conference. Thank you.